transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyed, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge.
Short mandala offering in English.
This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land.
Refuge in generating bodhicitta once in English and twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge to
the Dharma and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Sangye
Chodam Soki Chokma Namchu Bhartu Dakni Kyapsuchi Daki Chanyen Gi Pe Sonam Gi Dola Penchir Sangye Ruparsho Sangye Chodam Soki Choknam Jamchu Bhartu Dakni Kyapsuchi Dagi Chenyen Gi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Penchir Sangye Druparsho. Okay, thank you, Eloise, for leading the prayers. Let's go ahead and start with just a short meditation as usual. We'll spend the first few minutes just focusing on the breath to calm our minds a bit, let go of whatever distractions we might have from our day. And then I'll come in and lead you in a short reflection to set motivation for tonight. So again, work with the breath in whatever way you prefer for these next few minutes. Whenever the mind wanders away from the breath, just gently guide the mind back to the breath. Now let's set our motivation together for tonight's class and begin by feeling great joy at having this opportunity once more to gather together to study the Dharma. And each of us has created the causes for this, to get this perfect human life, to meet with the Dharma in this life. We should be elated at our good fortune. And of course, want to take advantage of that to make sure that we don't waste this precious opportunity. So we then set our motivation in terms of the three levels of the stages of the path, the long run. The first thing we can do with this human life is to assure that we have a continuity of good rebirths, that when this life ends, we can be assured of having another opportunity just like this one. The human existence where we can meet with the Dharma, train our minds, continue to develop on the path, and certainly avoid the unfortunate states, the states where we wouldn't have that leisure, that freedom. So this is the first level of motivation we bring to being here tonight. It's wanting to assure that we at least create the causes for a fortunate rebirth. And as we saw last week, even if we get a good rebirth, we are still in samsara, experiencing the faults of samsara, the lack of any certainty, the dissatisfaction that we have to experience, the fact that we are continually going from one state to another, never really finding anything that we can depend upon. And there are so many faults if we open our eyes and see the nature of cyclic existence, this going from life to life that we've been involved with since beginningless time. We'll continue this discussion tonight, but the important thing is that we generate a sense of renunciation, turning away from samsara and towards nirvana, towards peace, wanting this for yourself. And this is our second level of motivation, to truly want your own individual liberation, your freedom from the round of existence. But the most important motivation we can bring to our time together tonight is when we open our eyes to the reality that all beings are in the same predicament as ourselves. There's no difference fundamentally between ourselves and all other beings in our wish for happiness, our wish to be free from suffering. And yet, each of us still caught up in patterns of dissatisfaction and suffering and not finding the happiness and peace that we seek. So we can go beyond this goal of our own liberation to the goal of Buddhahood, enlightenment, this complete state where we then will have achieved our own potential, developed our minds completely, removed everything that obscures our own consciousness. But moreover, we'll be in a state where we can help others perfectly with an omniscient mind that knows how to best benefit them and the ability, the power through our compassion to do whatever it takes to help them. This is the ideal motivation to bring to tonight. The wish to develop ourselves fully so we can then help others to do the same. This mind of bodhicitta. So bring that level of motivation to the teachings tonight so that everything we do becomes a cause for all of these results, but most importantly, for our own enlightenment and the enlightenment of all beings. You can open your eyes fully and we'll start our class. Okay. So again, we're working our way through Nagarjuna's letter to a friend. And again, the structure of this text isn't quite, something we are used to seeing in terms of how it is being laid out. Remember that this is advice that he gave to a friend of his who was a king of this kingdom in India at the time. And so it's advice that is often directed to lay practitioners, but nonetheless is also still very much rooted in the fundamental teachings that we need in order to attain liberation and enlightenment and so on. So we're in this section. Let me go ahead and put it on the screen so that we can get grounded in where we were. Let's see here, I think it's where I want to go. Yeah, and let me actually back up just a little bit, a few pages. We entered this section that is called, this is the second part of the text, Development of Aversion for Samsara through Contemplating Its Defects. So this is where we're looking at the bigger picture again that we meditated on in terms of that second level of motivation, where we see that there are defects in continuing to be in samsara. There are faults that we need to open up our eyes and see. So let's just review briefly by going through the brief presentation and where Nagarjuna says to his friend who's the king, gentle sir, become disgusted with samsara. I like the word disillusioned. It's a little bit better. I mean, disgusted means like we almost look at people with disdain then, and that's not what we're driving for, is to get us to like dislike everybody around us. Rather, we see that there's nothing, there's no enchantment left. I always joke that it would be great to change our license plates here in New Mexico to the land of disenchantment. But anyway, I don't know that they're going to go for it, but the idea is that we have to see that samsara doesn't have anything that entices us any longer. It says here, source of so much suffering, material privation, death, illness, aging, and the like. Here now further a few of its faults. So this is what we looked at it in the middle of last week's class. And then we went on to what are usually referred to as the 6 faults or defects of samsara. The first one, the defect of being without certainty, that we can't rely upon the relationships that we have now. We might feel really close to the people who we have as friends, family members, what have you, but that's not definite. In your next life, they could be your worst enemies because the karma could change. Everything is constantly shifting. There's no stable ground. The second one is the defect of never becoming satisfied. Dissatisfaction is the undercurrent for all of samsara. Remember the Buddha, when he taught the first noble truth, he called it dukkha, which we often translate as suffering, but a better word for it is dissatisfaction, the lack of any sort of positive experience that we can rely upon. We're constantly dissatisfied because whatever we get is impermanent. It doesn't last. It always is changing. And so this is the nature of our existence. We have to see this very clearly. The third one and the fourth one kind of go together. The defect of discarding your body again and again. We have to leave behind a body. We come into this existence, we get used to inhabiting this body, and before we know it, we have to leave it. It's like we're just guests in this hotel room, if you will. We have to move on to the next hotel room. And that's the fourth one, the defect of having to be conceived again and again. Being born into another existence where we have to go through all of the miseries and difficulties of that. And this is where we left off last time, is in this section, the 5th fault, the defect of continually vacillating between eminent and lowly states. The fact that we do have higher states of existence that we experience that are really quite blissful and enjoyable, right? When they happen, we can partake of all those pleasures and enjoy it, but then we can fall from that very high state all the way down to the lowest state. There's no rules around this. It all has to do with our karma that we've created and what happens at the end of a particular existence and how we get propelled into that life, and even how the kind of different experiences within that life are all shaped by our karma as well. We're under the control of our karma and delusions. This is the second noble truth, that these are the causes of our suffering. We're going to continue on this roller coaster ride through all of these various existences until we stop the process, until we get rid of the causes. So we're in this section and we kind of began it, and then I did a little bit of kind of talking about the hell realms, because we're going to see these comparisons that are going on here. This section has a number of verses in it where it just gives different examples of how you can be in this very blissful state and then fall to a horrific experience. So let's go ahead and I'm going to review verse 69. That was the one we ended with last week. Having been chakra, again, then in the other text that I have, it's translated, Geshe Sopa's commentary, it's translated as Indra. Indra is said to be one of these desire realm gods that is often pointed to as kind of a creator god, but I don't think Buddhism wouldn't hold that he's the creator, but rather that he holds this particularly high status. So having been born in that role, worthy of the world's veneration, one falls again to the earth through the force of karma, or having been what's called a wheel-turning king or monarch, a chakravartin monarch, one assumes again in samsara a servant status. So this is just getting us into the ballpark of looking at this vacillation between these high states and low states. I think people sometimes when they hear about reincarnation or rebirth, they think it's like an evolutionary process, like you keep going step by step all the way up to the top or something. But it's more like, a yo-yo. It's kind of going all over the place, and we can end anywhere in the middle between any of these two poles of the worst states of existence. What we're going to see when we get into the hell realms tonight, this realm that's called Avicii, unrelenting torment, which just is really quite horrific when we hear about it. All the way up to the highest states, there's a state that's called the peak of psychic existence. It's the summit. And that's the only way you can go from there is down. That's the peak you can get to. And it's actually a formless existence where we don't have a coarse form at all. But there are kind of all these different realms in between, and we vacillate from one to the other. There's no real logic to it. It's all through the force of our karma. And whatever happens to ripen at the end of a particular life and propels us into our next existence. So let's go on then to the next verse, which is where we left off, and we'll see that we do get into some of these descriptions of some of the hellish experiences that we're going to go into in more detail tonight. I do want to warn people to fasten your seatbelts because it is going to be a bumpy night in terms of looking at the hell realms. So it says here, oh yes, Sarah.
I'm sorry, I missed the sixth defect.
We haven't gotten to it yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
That's
That's where there is, yeah, you're doing fine, Sarah. The fifth one, we go into like, I don't know, 5 or 6 verses on this. It keeps going on. For some reason, Nagarjuna felt like this was an important one to point out, that we kind of are bopping all over samsara, various states of existence. So again, that great power is unreliable, as has just been stated. The purpose of the following verse is to indicate the unreliability of sense pleasures. So sense pleasures in particular are being pointed out here because we can have great enjoyments in samsara. And then we can plummet to a place where all of our sensory experiences are in the nature of torture and suffering. So verse 70 says, having long experienced the pleasure of fondling the breasts and hips of celestial maidens, we can translate that to whatever. I mean, this was, again, he's giving this to the king who had a queen and had, probably some identification of what that would be like to have that sort of experience. It says here, one then undergoes unbearable contact with crushing, cutting, and slashing processes in the hells. It's like you go from this idyllic beach to becoming part of a meat grinder or something. So having been born as a deity, one may experience over a great length of time the pleasures of fondling the breasts and hips of celestial maidens. Then through the force of evil karma, one takes birth in the hells, where one is crushed between the tremendous iron mountains of the Samgata hell. This is called the crushing hell, literally. Cut to pieces by swords in Kala Sutra hell, which I think is is that the reviving one or the black line? I think that's the black line hell. And slashed by weapons or the beaks and claws of terrible creatures in the Tapana and Mahatapana hells. These are the one that's called specifically hot hell and great hot hell. Moreover, one must undergo the harsh suffering of these devastating processes for an even longer period than the former pleasures. This is one of the problems when you end up in these unfortunate states. The duration of your life there is so much longer. So even though you might get these idyllic experiences that go on for a while, I mean, look at the human existence where you're lucky if you live to 100 years, right? It's most people not even living that long. So when you look at these, the length of time that you spend in these existences, it's so much greater in the lower states in general, the hell realms in particular. So we're going to see more on the hell realms. I'm not going to get into huge commentaries on this part because this is just to point out this vacillation between these states, that we kind of get some feeling for the fact that there's no guarantee in samsara. Even if you do get a good rebirth as a human in your next life, you might very well end up plummeting to one of these unfortunate places. The following verse indicates that the pleasures derived from one's habitat are unreliable. So not only the sensory pleasures, but even the things we experience in our environment. Contemplate that after the pleasant experiences of the grounds depressing at the touch of your feet, while dwelling long on Meru's peak. This is the God realms where the ground is so soft that it's just very pliable. It depresses down when you press your foot into it, and then it goes back, when you lift your foot. The terrible suffering of the fire pit and the swamp of filth will strike you once again. These are what are called the neighboring or adjacent hells that are outside of the hot hells that you have to go through to escape from the hell existence. And in those places, you step into this fire pit and your foot is burned and everything. And the swamp of filth is where you're stepping into pools of excrement and so on. You'll see. I mean, this is, like I said, it's a bumpy ride tonight. So contemplate and bear in mind the following. One may first dwell for the period of 1,000 celestial years upon the peak of Mount Meru, which is made of the 4 types of precious materials and has the wonderful quality of softly sinking under the pressure of one step and rising again as the foot is raised. Yet after even this pleasure, one must again experience the miseries of moving about up to one's knees in the burning embers of the fire pit, Kokula, and of traveling in the swamp of filth, Kunapa, a putrid mire of excrement. And we'll get to the descriptions where they goes into even more detail on it. Our author, Venerable Rendawa, who's commenting on Nagarjuna's text, he spends a huge section kind of going through them. And we'll go through them, but I'm not going to dwell on them, but I am going to talk a little bit about the hell realms before we get into that and give you some encouragement to work with these. And we're still in this section about vacillating between states. The purpose of this next verse is to inspire one to renounce the pleasures experienced in the pleasure groves, these wonderful places where you can end up in through the force of your good karma. So verse 72 says, having frolicked while dwelling in lovely and pleasant gardens, regaled by celestial maidens or celestial men, however you want to look at it, depending upon your gender, your preference. Again, one's arms, legs, ears, and nose are cut in the forest of trees with sword-like leaves. Again, so you might have these idyllic experiences, and then you fall into horrific experiences of having all your limbs and so on cut. One may dwell in beautiful pleasure groves where one is regaled by celestial maidens, waited upon and surrounded by a great number of these maidens. However, after frolicking there at great length, enjoying sense pleasures, one goes to the hells of the forest of trees with sword-like leaves. This is also one of the neighboring or adjacent hells. These leaves, shaped like many kinds of sharp swords, fall when stirred by the wind, cutting one's arms, legs, ears, and nose. One thus incurs the misery of having the body and all its limbs cut and pierced. Furthermore, to go on with this whole thing, he's gonna rub our nose in it a bit here. After resting in the gently flowing stream with golden lotuses and celestial maidens of beautiful countenance, one again falls into the unbearably caustic boiling water of the infernal river of no ford. This is one of the, I think, the final of these adjacent hells where you have to go through this river that has no easy crossing. And so you end up in this boiling water that tortures you again on your way out of the hell realms. So it says, encircled by lovely celestial maidens, one may bathe in the celestial stream called gently flowing, which is filled with water of 8 qualities and golden lotuses. But after enjoying such pleasures at great length, one will fall into the alkaline waters of the infernal river of no ford, a river filled with unbearably caustic boiling water. It having been illustrated that the pleasures of the 2 lower classes of desire gods are unreliable, the following verse is stated to indicate the unreliability of pleasures pertaining to the other desire realm gods, such as Yama and so on, as well as those of the upper two realms. So let me just talk about it, take it off screen for just a moment. These desire god realms, there are said to be, I think, 6 different realms. I believe it's 6 of the desire realm gods. Then you have what are called the form realm gods and the formless realm gods. This peak of psychic existence I was talking about is at the top of the formless realm. But these are often called gods because it's a very idyllic sort of experience in many ways. But there's no reliability there either. And you get into these, the form realm and the formless realm are both the product of developing deep concentration. We talked about that earlier in this class when Nagarjuna did touch on what are called the 4 jhanas or concentrations. Those are a condition that will allow you to take rebirth in these states. But a rebirth in these states is not reliable because you'll be born there and have this kind of wonderful, blissful experience free of any gross suffering or what have you, but it doesn't last. You know. So any of these kinds of heavens, if you will, heavenly types of existences, regardless of what level they're at, are all, defective. They all are going to fail you in the end. As much as you would like to be able to rely upon them, you cannot. So in verse 74, Nagarjuna goes on to talk about that, having attained the extremely great pleasures of celestial realms and even Brahma's bliss of non-attachment. Again, one undergoes incessant suffering as kindling for the fires of Avicii. Avicii, again, is the worst of the 8 hells, the hot hells. It's said to be the worst realm in samsara. It's like, the place that you absolutely want to avoid because the suffering there is unrelenting. So the sense pleasures of the Yama class of deities and of the higher celestial beings far excel those of the lower gods. And in Brahma's realm, there is the bliss of having transcended attachment for sense objects. Yet even after attaining such states, through the force of non-virtuous karma of the type to be experienced in another lifetime, one is again forced to become kindling for the fires of Avicii hell, meaning that one is burned incessantly and without respite by unbearably hot fires. So this is, again, just showing that you can end up in these extremely idyllic states and fall all the way to the worst suffering in samsara. One more verse in this section, and don't think we're letting go of this kind of topic because we will come back to it later tonight. But at least we're going to move on. Nagarjuna's rubbed our nose in this one a bit too much, perhaps. When one has attained the state of sun and moon, the light of one's body illumines the entire world. Yet returning again to the darkness, not even one's outstretched hand is visible. I want to talk about this being kind of born as the sun and moon because, it was interesting. I think Makal was here one night for the teachings and she was attributing earth, sentience to the earth, that the earth is a sentient being. And I think it's fine to respect the earth in that way and think that you don't want to harm the earth because it is something that you would revere. But nonetheless, I think that this is really something that is taught in Buddhism. And Geshe Sopa, in his book on page 245, even speaks to this a little bit. He says the next verse uses the sun and moon as an example of the unreliability of samsara. This can be explained from the mythic perspective, where the sun and moon are deities, or from the point of view of light, simply, that we want to have these kinds of ability. We can attain states where we have kind of an illumination to us or what have you. So it says in traditional Indian cosmology, to the light. They thought that the moon was a block of crystal that sent out back. Sorry, let me go back and read a little bit because I think people may have missed me for a moment or two, because I'm hoping this doesn't recur, but we had it happen a few weeks ago, so hopefully it won't. Again, we now know through science how illumination occurs, but in ancient times, people believed that divine beings caused the light. They thought that the moon, a crystal that sent out cooling light, and the sun was a type of fire that sent out hot light. You don't need to take this literally to understand Nagarjuna's analogy. Here, think about how some beings are born with beautiful bodies that are decorated so wonderfully that other people. So that's the idea behind this. Whether, I mean, I can't speak to whether beings can actually take the shape of a orb of light, whether that is actually something that is true or not. I've never heard that from any of my teachers, but I think we can, again, get the gist of this, that there are these states that could be very idyllic, where we are able to supply the world or other beings around us with radiance and illumination, and other places where we are just stuck in darkness. So the statement about one's attaining a birth as the celestial beings of the sun and moon and illuminating the world with one's body follows popular speech without distinguishing between habitat, sun and moon as physical bodies, and inhabitant, sun and moon as celestial beings. More properly, it is the light from the base of the celestial mansions of the sun and moon, which illuminates the entire world. Again, this is all still within the realm of Buddhist cosmology, but nonetheless, we know now, again, how illumination occurs in our world and can explain it that way. So having then taken rebirth in some dark region lying between world systems where the light of the sun and moon do not reach, one cannot even see one's own hand stretched out before one. And this whole idea of light and darkness, though, can also be seen somewhat symbolically, right? That we have sort of the light that we experience when we are in more idyllic states, the light that shines upon us, the good fortune. And then, of course, also how we have, hope I haven't left everyone behind. Nobody's showing up on the screen. And then we have kind of the darkness that happens in various realms. So,
I'm here.
do you have, you're there? Okay, all
I
right,
am.
good.
Can't
Thank
see
you for
myself
letting
anymore for some reason. Sorry.
Okay. All right, good. Let me go ahead then and continue. And if something happens, maybe the sixth fault, Sarah was asking about the sixth. The sixth is the defect or fault of essentially being companionless. We talked about, it's saying it's loading. I wonder if it's actually shared. Let me stop and share it again. The idea is that, let me talk about this one first before I put it back on screen. Can you check on the phone? Am I still showing there? Yeah, okay, good. All right. So if we look at it, I mean, we do have a lot of people that we spend our lives in psychic existence with, and we rely upon them and get very close to them. But you have to go on from this life alone, right? There's no one that goes with you. Even if you were to die in a car accident with the one that you love, they wouldn't go with you. You'd be each on your own karmic trajectory. We're essentially alone. There's no one that we're really with that's a constant companion. So this is a bit of suffering. I find this one kind of interesting because we don't talk about like loneliness or solitude or companionlessness that frequently in Buddhism. So verse 76 says, as such are the defects of samsara, take the lamplight of the three types of merit. For alone one enters the infinite darkness, which is unaffected by sun or moon. So this one is pointing out that fault of being companionless, but it's together with a sort of admonition. If we look at these 6 defects of samsara, we have to put our money on creating virtue, merit. And there are different ways of explaining these 3 types. Let's look at our text and see what it says. So realizing that life is impermanent, that it consists of such a variety of eminent and lowly states, and is defective, and that death and its consequences are inevitable, one must grasp the lamplight which dispels the great darkness of the evil states of being. That light is the threefold merit, either of liberality, which again, in this rather old translation is referring to generosity. The morality, of course, having a good ethical conduct, and then meditation. Or it can refer to the three merits of body, speech, and mind that we make physically, verbally, mentally. But even Geshe Sopa points out another way that we could think. Okay, sorry about that, folks. I'm not sure what's happening again with my computer, but so again, I was talking about these three types of merit. The first one was, as in our text, generosity, morality, and meditation. The third one was merits of our body and mind. I'm sorry, second one. The third one are the wisdoms of hearing. That we acquire wisdom is first by hearing. It's telling me my internet connection is unstable. Yeah, I think we do. So let me try putting, oh, maybe I'll just leave it the way that it is. So again, the wisdoms of hearing, thinking, and meditating are the way that we accumulate wisdom on the path. And that meritorious action of gaining that wisdom helps us to acquire it, think about it, contemplate it, to deepen it, and then eventually meditate on it to change our minds. So let's see if I can share the text now. We're going to go into our next section. This is the seventh point in this outline. The first six were these six faults. So let me go down here. Oh, I didn't finish that quite yet. There's a little bit more to this section. If one is without merit's light, one is companionless and must enter all alone into the infinite darkness of the three evil states, which are unaffected, that is, undispelled by the light of sun or moon. These three evil states are what we're going to look at next. And that's the first part of this, kind of looking at the more specific sufferings. They are the hell realm, the animal realm, and the realm of the hungry ghosts, the pretas. In such a darkness, only virtue can serve as companion, savior, or lamplight. The Lalita Vistara expresses this in the following words. Except for virtuous karma performed, which comes following after, there is no companion for composed things. They lack savior, family, friend, or retinue. So we see that again, this idea of not having a companion is the fact that the only companion we have is really our virtue, is the amount of merit that we've accumulated that will allow us to continue to experience good things within samsara. Nothing else comes with you, none of your friends, none of your dear colleagues, people who you've gotten very close to. So now we're going to go into this seventh section that is going to detail out all the specific miseries, well, not all, but a good number of the specific miseries that are experienced by the five types of beings. And you say, well, aren't there six types of beings? We normally talk about the three lower ones I just mentioned, which are the hell realm, the animal realm, and the hungry ghost realm. But we have the three higher realms, which are the human realm, the demigod or asura realm, and then the suras, the deities, the gods. So we're going to actually leave the human realm out of this discussion. It's kind of interesting. You know, I think maybe Nagarjuna's point was that we know the suffering of the human realm well enough, and we've already talked about some of the other faults. Being born, getting ill, dying, all of these things are part of our human existence. So we're not going to see a detailed description of the sufferings of the human realm. But nonetheless, Nagarjuna is going to point out the specific faults and sufferings that have to be experienced even in these more idyllic states, as well as the three states that we already should want to avoid, without doubt, which are the three lower realms. So before I get into this, I did want to share one little slide from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, because I think it might be helpful. If I can get this up here, there it is. Okay, and I'll make this into a slideshow so it's a little bit bigger on the screen here and at home. Lama Zopa on meditating on the hell realms. This is from the Lamrim year, which I hope some of you are using in your meditation, your Lamrim meditation, 365 meditations that you can use in your daily practice every day of the year. The descriptions of the lower realms are terrifying, especially the hell realm, but we need to be terrified. This is not a numbing fear, a fear that paralyzes us, but a positive fear that spurs us into action and gives us ironclad determination to practice Dharma and do nothing but practice Dharma. We see the suffering that we are in imminent danger of experiencing and naturally do whatever possible or everything possible to avoid it. Now, this is the whole point of all of this, and I hope I managed to get that out of off the screen. Let me make sure it's there. It should be gone now. Okay. These states of existence are something we should have what Rinpoche often called a wholesome fear of. A wholesome fear is the same as if you go to the doctor and the doctor does your blood work and he looks at it and goes, guess what? You're not in such good shape. You've got a lot of stuff going under the surface that needs to be addressed. Or you could get diabetes and you could get heart failure and you could get, all these various things. You take it seriously, right? Because you think the doctor knows the physical attributes and things that are being examined. He or she knows what advice is best for you, what will actually kind of curtail some of that future suffering that you might have to experience. So you take the doctor's word and you practice what the doctor says, right? You start exercising and you change your diet and you do whatever is necessary. Maybe take some medications if you have to. You go through all of that. Why? Because you want to avoid suffering. It's very simple, and there's no other reason, right? You don't want the suffering of getting these illnesses and dying at a young age, or a younger age than what you could potentially if you took good care of your health. So we have to look at it. This is the Buddha and Nagarjuna extending the horizon and looking beyond this life, looking at future existences, and showing us that all these places, especially the three lower realms, are not a place we want to end up in at all. But even the two higher realms of the demigods and the gods, we don't want to end up there either, because they become a bit too intoxicated with pleasure and they don't necessarily have the opportunity we have in this human life. I did promise to you that I would share one little story about Rinpoche and the hell realms, and the story, I couldn't believe it when I first heard it from my friend Venerable Phil Baker. Venerable Phil and I were both living in San Francisco when the master's program that I attended was being announced, and we both decided to go. He ended up leaving, well, he did the entire program, but he didn't do it like with all the exams and everything, but nonetheless, he's a wonderful friend. I still am in touch with him a little bit, but he went to Kopan Monastery before he went to the master's program. And it was the November course that some of you are familiar with, at least, if not have attended. It's a month-long course, and Rinpoche would come in and teach for about 2 weeks of it. There was one night when Rinpoche was doing his normal thing of teaching really quite late, and he was teaching on the hell rooms. And he just kept going over all the specifics, the things that we're going to see shortly. And after the teaching, Rinpoche's leaving, and he stops, and there was a man, I guess, close to the aisle or something that Venerable Phil knew. He wasn't a venerable at the time, but anyway, he knew him. And Rinpoche said something to this man and then continued walking out. So Phil went over to this guy and he said, what did Rinpoche say to you? And the look on this guy's face was pretty amazing. He said, it's so weird. All during this teaching on the hell, we get a pizza. And he said, and Rinpoche said, there are no pizzas in the hell room. So remember, there are no pizzas in the hell room. But, you know, however we get the message, this guy got the message pretty directly from Rinpoche that, you know, described, and these could very well be our experiences. And as it's going to be pointed out in a later verse, it's that much time between us and these experiences, essentially. You know, if we were to have a heart attack and die on the spot here, we could be in that hell realm within seconds, you know, depending upon the karma, how quickly it ripens, what have you. Pardon?
After you die.
It's after you die. Else, we'll get to those. That can be experienced in a human existence. So let's dig in. Let's go ahead and start our little survey of these wonderful hell realms. This section has 5 parts. Again, the 5 different realms of existence. The first is the suffering of the hells. The following verse is stated to indicate the number of hells in general. For beings who perform evil deeds, there will be perpetual suffering in the hells of Samjiva, Kalasutra, Mahatapana, Samgata, Rarava, Avicii, and so forth, because it doesn't really delineate them all. I might tell you in advance that there are 8 hot hells, which it's kind of interesting. I mean, when I was in Madrid teaching in Spain on a tour in Spain, I went to the Prada, the wonderful art museum there, and they've got those triptychs of Hieronymus Bosch, where he's got all these pictures of hell realms and all these beings being tortured and what have you. I mean, they're very much like what we're going to read in these. I think that these hot hells in particular are something that cross-culturally have gotten into our collective psyche. And a lot of people react strongly when they hear these, because that may be why they left some spiritual traditions, is because they got too much of that eternal hell and damnation thing. None of these states are eternal. None of these states are something we have to experience forever. They are states of existence that are there due to karma, and when the karma is depleted, that ends, and we go on to something else. Yeah. But as long as we keep doing this, going on from one thing to another, as was pointed out in that 5th fault, there's nothing certain that we can rely upon. We might get a more idyllic experience after this hellish existence, but then we fall again. So anyway, there are 8 hot hells, there are 8 cold hells. There are technically 16 of the neighboring or adjacent hells, because there are 4 of them, but they're on each of the sides. So you've got these hell realms, and people exit, the beings exit on any one of the 4 sides, and they have to go through a similar experience through these adjacent hells. And then there are what are called the partial or occasional hells, where you have beings who are experiencing a hellish type of existence as part of a human existence, for example. But these are entire realms that are, whether, you know, how they exist or where they exist isn't as important as the experience of being there is as real as the experience of being here. So don't think that it's like just a dream sort of state. It may feel like a dream, but it's a dream you can't wake from until the karma is exhausted. So our author, Venerable Randawa, says, beings who perform wrongful deeds of the 3 gateways, again, body, speech, and mind, come to experience perpetually. Again, perpetually doesn't mean eternally, but it means continually until that karma is done. The misery of the hells of Samjiva, Kalasutra, Samgata, Rarava, Maharavava, Marava. It's hard to say those R's in there. Tapana, Mahatapana, Avicii, and so forth. The remaining hells, the partial hells, Pratyeka, Naraka, and the cold hells. Those born in Samjiva, Samjiva is the first, and it's said to be the least of the suffering in the hot hells. It's called reviving hell, is what Samjiva translates to. They become frightened at the sight of each other, right? You develop fear, like you're going to fight another gang or something, other people who are opposed to you. Then whatever they lay hold of becomes a sharp weapon, which they hurl at one another, severing limbs and other appendages. So this is what you're born there through the force of your karma, to fight with other hell beings who are also there due to their karma. They fall unconscious to the ground. Actually, we should be reading this as we fall unconscious to the ground, because this is meant to be a contemplation about your suffering in these existences, should you fall into such an unfortunate state. You fall unconscious to the ground, whereupon a voice from the sky declares, "Be you revived." Rising again, they their fall. So you just keep doing this. It's like a bad movie, you know. just like when beings come back to life after having been cut to pieces by each other, and then they keep coming back to life, keep reviving. Because these beings experience suffering against this background for a long duration, they are called samjiva, those who are again revived. So that's the first of these hells. Again, that's the least suffering. The second one is called Black Line Hell. I'm going to take it off screen just a moment because I remember Jeffrey Hopkins talking about how he found this really an intriguing concept that you're actually born into this realm where like these lines are put on your body. Your body is much larger than the bodies we have, and it is flattened out on this hot surface, and like pegs, spikes put around it to like keep it in that position. These lines are drawn on your body, and then you're severed into these pieces. And you feel the severing of those pieces completely. I mean, it's not like if you were to cut off your arm, then you wouldn't feel your arm anymore in this human life, right? Because it's no longer attached to your central nervous system. Your feeling, your sensation goes throughout the entire body. Let's read how our author describes this. But Jeffrey Hopkins thought this was really quite, interesting. How do you create that karma, to be reborn in such a state? Maybe if you like butchered animals or something like that. I remember those things you see of like a pig and all the various sections of the pig that become the butt and the shoulder and the da-da-da-da. I don't know. The bodies of those born in Kala Sutra, again, this black line hell, are marked by the guards of that hell with 4, 8, or more black streaks, then sliced and cut to pieces with many varieties of sharp weapons. Because they experience suffering against this background for a long duration, these beings are called Kala Sutra. Those with black streaks or black line is again the more common translation of that. That's worse suffering than the reviving hell. Now we go to Samgata. Samgata is the crushing hell. The guards of Samgata assemble the beings born there, driving them between mountains, shaved, like the heads of goats, sheep, and the like. Crushed by the mountains, they are then reassembled and placed in an iron mechanism which crushes them like sugar cane, blood gushing forth from every body aperture. Still again, they are assembled to suffer excruciating pain as they are pelted by a shower of iron boulders. Because they experience suffering against this background for a long duration, these beings are called Samgata, those who are crushed. The karma that they say is behind that is having crushed beings. A lot of people when if they have like a flea infestation in their pets or something, they might crush the fleas. And you think, oh no big deal crushing a flea. But you could end up in this hell realm where the rocks look like fleas and they would be crushing you. So again, wherever I can, I'll point out some of the correlations to our actions. But as much as possible, we should be trying to avoid any of these, actions that would be projecting us into such an unfortunate state. Let's go back to our text to the next one, which is called the crying hell. This is where we have the crying and then we have the great crying, and we'll explain the difference between these two. That's the next 2 paragraphs. Beings in Rarava, the crying hell, search for a place of rest. They enter into an iron dwelling. Once inside this iron house or iron dwelling, a fire erupts and the doors are immediately locked, so you can't get out. And you're burned by the tremendous blaze, screaming in desperation. Because they experience suffering against this background for a long duration, these beings are called Rarava, those who cry out. And then in Mahararava, the great crying hell, that's the 5th one, beings find themselves in a dwelling similar to that mentioned above, but having 2 compartments, meaning that they end up inside 2 burning houses. It's like your house is inside another house. So your dwelling is burning and doing all of this while you're inside another one that is burning and all of that. So you end up with like twice the intensity of the heat and the duration of that pain of being in this great crying hell. Again, I know these things are not easy to talk about, but I think it is important that if these are states of existence, and there's no reason to doubt, I mean, the Buddha didn't pull our leg on much else, so hopefully he's not pulling our leg on this. So we have then the next one, which is called Tapana, which is usually just referred to as hot hell. But nonetheless, these are all within the category of hot hells, but this one has heat as a particular property of it. The guards of Tapana boil the beings there in iron cauldrons filled with blazing molten metal and roast them in glowing iron pans. This in particular, if you look at any of Hieronymus Bosch's paintings, the one in particular, it's this triptych. On the one side is this inferno, and the other side is paradiso, the paradise. You'll see very similar things. It's kind of uncanny. And then it says, where was I at here? They pound them upon a blazing iron surface with metal hammers and pierce them with spears, which stick out from the top of the head and cause flames to issue from every pore of the body. Because they experience suffering against this background for a long duration, the beings here are called those who burn, tapana. Now this next one, there's definitely one part of a Bosch painting that has this, where this trident, this three-pronged spear is coming up through the center of a being, out their head, and so on. So this is Mahabhatana, the very hot hell. In Mahabhatana, beings experience the suffering just mentioned with the addition of being pierced by three-pronged spears which protrude from the top of the head and both shoulders, flames issuing forth from every pore of the body. They are as well wrapped with flaming sheets of iron and pierced on a blazing steel surface by 100 spikes and so on. Because they experience suffering against this background for a long duration, these beings are called Mahatapana, those who burn intensely, the very hot hell. Okay, we're getting there. This is the last of the hot hells, and we'll be going on to the other ones, but this is Avicii. This is how this is described. It's usually translated as unrelenting torment. It's like when you're born there's not even any sort of break between some of these things, like what we saw earlier, where you're at least, you finish killing each other and then you're revived. And you have like a moment where you're like, okay, nothing's happening right now. But then immediately you do experience something. Here, there's no break. Masses of fire from all four directions converge upon the beings of Avicii, turning to a single blaze within their bodies. But for their cries of misery, one is unable to distinguish between the beings and the flames. It's like you are the flame. And only distinguish, there's a being there. Because the suffering in this region is constant and without respite, it is called Avicii, unremitting torture. Because they experience suffering against this background for a long duration, these beings are called those tortured unremittingly. Those are the worst of the hells. The circumjacent, they call here, which again we often call the adjacent or adjoining, neighboring regions. These are located on the four sides of each of the 8 great hells. So there are the 8 great hells, and these cover the territory you'd have to go to out of each of those. So again, there are 16 in total because there are 4 neighboring hells on each of the 4 sides. Each of these sides has a gateway beyond which 4 additional types of suffering are situated. The first one, which is called Kukulam, which is usually just translated as the fire pit, the pit of burning embers in some translations, lies immediately outside the gateways. This is what you would encounter first, and it consists of knee-deep fiery embers. Here, one's skin and flesh are consumed as one steps down, and then they grow back as you raise your leg. So it's like you'd be making one step, and then you raise up your leg, and it regenerates, and then you step into it again, and it regenerates. Again, pretty horrific suffering. Next to that is Kunapa. That's the second of these, the swamp of filth or swamp of decomposed corpses. It's a mire of excrement, extremely putrid in odor. Arriving there, one falls in and sinks up to one's head. Within the mire are creatures that pierce the flesh with extremely sharp beaks. Okay, then the next one, the third one, has 3 parts to it. Adjacent to this is Suramarga, which is the razor-filled path. This is where your flesh is destroyed as you step down and regenerated with the foots being raised. Neighboring this region is Asi Patravana, the forest of trees with sword-like leaves. This is where you come to enjoy the refreshing shade there, but instead, all these, you kind of fall to the ground as the leaves drop off and they cut your limbs and all of your minor appendages. Wild dogs then seize your flesh and proceed to devour it. So you don't just have that one, you have another suffering. Then the third part of this third one is the adjoining Aya Salmalavana, which is usually translated as the Shamali forest, the forest of Shamali trees. And these are kind of interesting one here, this karma. The forest of iron Shamali trees, one is forced to climb up and down the trees. Not really, what happens if it says forced? It's not like somebody is there forcing you. What they say happens is you enter into this forest and you hear the voices of those that you were quite attached to in your previous life coming from the top of the trees. Like, oh, come here, I'm up here, please, I want to see you. And you go climbing up this tree and all the leaves of it point downward to cut your flesh as you're climbing up the tree through your desire to see this loved one. You get up there and there's nobody there. Now they're at the bottom of the tree, yelling, saying, please come down, I'm down here. You go that way, but then the leaves turn in the opposite direction and cut you as you go down. It's a real interesting kind of thing that, again, you can make some horror movies out of this stuff because it's pretty horrific. So then it says, you're forced to climb up and down the trees. While ascending, great thorns point downwards, piercing and slashing the flesh. As one descends, they turn and face upwards. Here also are iron-beaked crows, which pluck out one's eyes and eat them. Due to the similarity of the types of harm located in them, these three, the razor-filled path, the grove of the sword-leaf trees, and the shalmali trees, are all counted along, as one, as a single region. So you've got to go through a lot of torture right there. And that third one, you haven't even reached the last of these, the river with no ford. So next to these, the last of these neighboring hells is Nadi Vatarani, the river with no ford, filled with boiling water. Having fallen into it, one is prevented from emerging by spear-wielding guards situated on both sides. These guards are said not to be sentient beings who are born as hell realm guards, but rather a karma that you've created by being in that realm to experience these guardians of the hell realms that do these things to you. If one does manage to get out, one is forced onto one's back upon a flaming iron surface. The mouth is prized open and with an iron instrument, and then one is compelled to consume a flaming iron ball or molten copper, when experiencing suffering against such a background for a long duration. So as there are 4 of these to each side, those 4 I went through, the third one again having 3 parts to it, they total 16 in number, 4 on each of the 4 sides of these 8 hot hells that you would have to exit from in order to escape the hell realms. Then the Abhidharma Kosha, Vasubandhu's text, which goes into all this Buddhist cosmology and these various realms and so on, says to all 8 there are 16 additional regions. To all 8 of the hot hells, they have these 16. The fiery embers, excrement mire, razor-filled path, etc., and the river. So now we go on to the cold hells. We're not quite done with the hells yet, but beings who are born in the cold hells experience the misery of cold in the following manner. Again, we're going to go from the least suffering to the worst suffering. Those who are born in Arbuda, having great sores, it's usually called the blistering hell, the hell where you have blisters on your body that are experienced from the cold. They're stricken by a great cold wind. The entire body contracts as it becomes covered with sores or blisters. The next one, Nirar Buddha, where the sores burst open, it's usually called bursting blisters. The sores burst open there and one's body shrinks still further. Now, the next 3, the names of them in the Sanskrit are usually kind of a sound that you would make in being there, like it emanates from your body because of the intense cold that you're experiencing. And they're usually referred to as the chattering teeth is the first one, and then groaning, and then moaning. So you have kind of this increase in your experience of the cold. The names of those in Atata, Hahava, and Huhuva are described on the basis of the sounds these beings emit while tormented by the cold. Then we get into the last 3 that have to do with the way that your body kind of breaks and cracks from the cold. A great wind strikes the beings in the next one, Utpala. This is the 6th of these, blue lotus, causing their skin to turn blue and split open into 5 or 6 sections. In lotus, the skin changes from blue to red in color, splitting open into 10 or more sections. In Maha Padma, the great lotus, one's skin becomes extremely red in color and splits open into 100 or more sections. That's the worst of the cold hells. Then we have the partial hells. Again, these places where you have a human existence or some type of existence, but you're experiencing hell for a portion of that life. The suffering of the partial hells is described as follows. A butcher of cows from Rajagriha took birth in the form of a horse, whose cries of grief filled the air, while his apprentice took birth in the form of a heap of foul-smelling bones picked at by crows. So it's said to be kind of a hellish experience within it. Most horses don't have that experience and so on. Other similar experiences can be found in the Avadana of Sandarakshita. One is that of a man named Shrona who lost his way near the ocean. After wandering about in a desert for some time, he came across a person who by night experienced the joys of a celestial mansion filled with heavenly riches. But with the coming of day, the mansion would vanish, and the man would fall to the ground where he experienced the great suffering of being slashed and eaten by frightful beasts. At night, as night fell, he would once again experience the heavenly riches. So Shrona inquired of the person about this and received the following reply. By day, I took the lives of others, observing by night morality's virtues. From these deeds, I now experience these good and evil fruits. So someone can, I guess, during the course of a day as a human, do negative actions during one part of the 24 hours, and then during the other part, do something really positive and kind of get that mixed result. Proceeding further, he saw another man who by day experienced heavenly riches and at night was enwrapped by an immense ogress who would consume the man in stages, beginning with the head. He would thus suffer unbearable misery, then enjoy by day the same experiences as before. Shrona asked about this, as before, and received this reply. By night, I lusted for immoral sex, by day, observing morality's virtues. From those deeds, I now experience these good and evil fruits. Now, this is how the scripture described the sufferings of the partial hells. We can say that, certainly there are, many hellish types of existence in the human realm. What people go through in war zones and things like that, where they're, being bombarded, having their everything that would sustain their life being completely removed from them. We're not denying that there are kind of mirrors of these in the human existence, but these are being set out by the Buddha as separate places of existence that are karmically induced. We create the karma for them, and then we have to endure that suffering. Remember when we went through all of these non-virtues, the 10 non-virtues, and I talked about if you have a complete path of action, meaning that all 4 of the aspects are there, you create the karma for a rebirth in one of these unfortunate states if you have the negative karma. Of course, if you have the positive karma, you're creating the opposite, a rebirth in one of the fortunate realms of existence. But as we're going to see, even those are being pointed out as being somewhat defective, not as much suffering, obviously, usually for beings there, but something we also have to take note of. Now, unfortunately, we're going to have a little bit more on the hells. Nagarjuna isn't content with just describing them in that one verse. He's going to give a little bit more about some of these, starting with Samgata. If you remember, that's the crushing hell. So some are pressed like sesamum, like sesame seeds, and others are likewise ground up like fine flour. Some are cut to pieces with saws, still others are split with dreadful sharp-bladed axes. Maybe I don't even need to read the description of these because there's not much more to be said. Others are likewise poured full of a flaming liquid of molten iron. Some are impaled on barbed and flaming iron spears. This is in this hot hell, the Tapana and the rivers of no ford. These various existences where it was pointed out that you could have to ingest all of this molten metal. Slashed by ferocious iron-fanged dogs, some wave their arms to the sky, while other helpless beings are pecked by ravens with sharp iron beaks and terrible claws. Again, we saw that when we went through them. And this, I think, since the additional commentary was added by Venerable Randawa, he was kind of already commenting on many of the things that are in here. Verse 81, some cannot bear it when worms and insects of all kinds, thousands of blue bottles and black bees touch them, and they writhe and rail when those that inflict grave wounds devour them. So there can be all these sorts of infestations and being devoured by all these various beings, the sufferings of one of the neighboring hells. Then 82, some in a heap of blazing slag are incessantly burned, their mouths gaping open. Some are boiled headfirst in great cauldrons like rice dumplings. I'll read that little part at the bottom there. Some are boiled headfirst in blazing cauldrons filled with caustic water. Tossed up and down, they look like dumplings, balls of pressed rice in a pot of boiling water. Kind of chuckle, but it's pretty horrific if you think that that's a being, that's kind of there like this dumpling in hot water. They have a diamond hard nature, those evildoers who, being kept from the hells only till the breath ceasing, again, what I was saying earlier, that it's just one breath away in a sense, are not frightened in 1,000 ways after hearing of the hell's immeasurable suffering. I mean, others kind of pointing out, we must have like this diamond hard nature if we hear these teachings and it doesn't affect us. We kind of like, oh, no big deal. These things, they're not meant to give you nightmares. They're not meant to like upset you in a sense that, just causes needless fear. Remember what Rinpoche is saying, that these are to give us good warning. Most beings don't have a belief in any of this at all, right? And even a lot of Buddhists don't have a belief in it. But without something to kind of spur us to create virtue and avoid non-virtue, again, we can have different motivations for that. I'm not denying that fear, this idea of the stick versus the carrot. I mean, our culture is very much anti-stick, right? We just don't like being told that we should be afraid of something. We don't like fear-based ways of acting. But as I said, much of what we do in terms of our health or other things we do out of some fear. Even what people do in terms of saving money for their elderly years, for their senior years, right? You don't want to be destitute when you get to that time of your life and realize that you're going to end up homeless on the street. We care about our future experiences. We just have to translate that to these existences that are beyond this life. And hopefully we can make a change in our behavior if we need to, or at least make sure that we practice lots of virtue. Remember, there was a verse earlier that talked about how if we have a preponderance of virtue, then what non-virtue we've done will seem quite slight. And the karmic tendency will be to move us into more favorable existences. So let's read the commentary on this one. It says, those evildoers who have performed karma, certain to bring about the experience of the hells, are separated from that suffering by only the time it takes for the process of breathing to stop, since immediately after the final breath, one enters the next state of existence. Thus, technically you enter the bardo, but there are some actions of immediate retribution. I think we touched on those earlier, where you would take rebirth immediately in the worst hell without any intermediate state. Thus, any person who, despite having heard about the hell's immeasurable suffering as described above, does not become frightened in 1,000, that is a great many ways, such that their mind is not terrified and body seems ready to burst, unquestionably has a body and mind of a diamond-like nature. Hard-headed, I guess, is the way to put it. You're awful stubborn and hard-headed that you can't generate some trepidation about this. Otherwise, they would surely become terrified. And you must be kind of hard-headed. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Okay, here we go. So then it says, the reason for this is stated in the next verse. If even seeing drawings of statues, recalling, reading, or hearing of the hells engender fear, what need to speak of experiencing this dreadful maturation? So when we see something like Bosch's paintings of these hell realms and you look at them and when you're in like the Prada, you're right there in front of the painting pretty much. There's like maybe 2 feet between you and this triptych. And you're like being able to look at this and just be amazed at what's being depicted there. This is, again, very much in line with what we have in these teachings. So if seeing the drawings of them, recalling one's former experiences, or hearing of them from others, if reading about such experiences in the scriptures, or viewing figures of them fashioned from clay and so forth, cause one to become frightened, there's no need to speak of the fear that comes with actually experiencing those dreadful maturations, right? You'd be pretty terrified if they were to happen even just for a flash, for a moment. And it'd be wonderful if somebody could do that for us, show us what it's like for 1 second of being in one of these hell realms. Probably scare the living daylights out of us. The suffering in all the hells is not the same. Hence, the following verse is stated to show that the lower hells contain suffering of progressively greater intensity, and that the greatest of all is in Avicii. Whoops. Somehow I ended up back again. Okay. So, verse 85, just as the extinction of craving is the Lord of all pleasures, so too is the suffering of Avicii, hell, the most terrible of all sufferings. We have to kind of get that this is the worst place that we could possibly end up, right? Is in the hell of Avicii. Of all pleasures, there's none higher than the bliss of liberation and enlightenment, for that matter, which is the total extinction of desire of the three realms. We don't know that, we haven't had that taste, but that taste is supposed to be incredibly blissful. Thus, this bliss is the Lord, which is to say, it is supreme. In the same way, the Avicii hell is the greatest and most dreadful of all the sufferings that result from non-virtue. How great is this hell suffering? We're getting our share of hell rooms tonight. The following verse is stated to demonstrate that there is nothing among humans to compare with it. You know, we might think we're experiencing a lot of pain or difficulty, but it's nothing compared to even a second in these realms. The suffering here in this human realm of being jabbed for a single day by 300 spears at full does not approach or equal even a minute portion of the least sufferings of the hells. I did it again. Somehow I'm hitting the wrong key here. Sorry. The suffering here in the human realm of lying naked and being jabbed with the greatest of force by 300 spears all at once, and for the period of 1 full day, does not even roughly approximate the lightest of the hell sufferings, such as that of the partial hells, nor does it equal even a minute portion, such as 100th or 1,000th part of it. And then finally, how long must such sufferings be experienced? The Abhidharmakosha sets forth the lifespans of beings in each of the hells as follows. In the 6 hells of Samjiva, etc., a full day is equal to the lives of the desire realm gods, respectively. So like a whole life of a desire realm god is 1 day in these hell realms. Thus their lives are similar to those of the desire gods in that way. In Mahatapana, it is a half in Avicii and intermediate kalpa. And all these are just describing incredibly long durations of time. Won't go into all of the cosmological details on all of that, but the general statement having been made, though so very unbearable suffering will be experienced for even 1 billion years, one will never be freed from that life as long as the non-virtue is not exhausted. Again, it lasts as long as the karma is there to experience it. So one may experience the most terrible suffering in ways just described for as long as 1 billion years. Yet until the cause non-virtue is exhausted, one will never be freed from that life, because karma to be experienced in hells is of great force. Then the following verse, the last of this section on the hells, states that since suffering in the hells, as described, originates from non-virtue, this cause should be abandoned. The seeds of these, the fruits of non-virtue, are wrongdoing of body, speech, and mind. You must exert your every strength to prevent, by any means, even their slightest occurrence. The seeds of the hell sufferings, results of non-virtue, are wrongful deeds of the body, such as killing, taking lives, stealing, inappropriate sexual behavior, such as adultery and so on. Speech, like stating falsehoods, lies, as well as speech that divides others, harsh speech, even meaningless speech. And mind, the 3 of mind, such as coveting, ill intent, and wrong views. Those are the 10 non-virtues that we've talked about before. You, O king, should prevent yourself through every possible means from performing in even the slightest degree these 3 types of wrongdoing. To that end, exert yourself with all the strength you have.
Yeah.
Well, we made it through the hell realm section. We're still kind of looking forward to the animal realms, which it's interesting. Sometimes they point these three realms, they present them in a slightly different order. They say the hell realms and the hungry ghosts and then the animals. When it's presented that way, it's in terms of the suffering that you experience there, because the sufferings of animals in general is much less than hungry ghosts, and of course, hungry ghosts much less than the hell realms. But they say that in some texts like ours, they're going to present them in the opposite, and we're with the last two in the opposite order, hell realm first, then animals, and then hungry ghosts. And why is that? They say because actually there is some intelligence among the hungry ghosts. So even some of them can understand Dharma and perhaps can, do something that is virtuous. Whereas for animals, it's very, very difficult. Their main delusion is ignorance. Again, animals do have some compassion for their own kind, and especially for their young and what have you. I remember hearing about this cat some years ago that was in New York City, a building that was burning, and her kittens were inside, and she went in and rescued every one of them, got her own fur singed and burned by going in and doing this. But that's very much about an attachment too, right? It's not necessarily like this cat's going to go in and rescue puppies that some dog left behind or something. That's probably not going to happen. And dogs, and many dogs are service animals and can be trained to be compassionate and giving care to others and what have you. So it's not that they don't have any possibility of generating virtue. There's just not a lot of intellect from their side to engage in that, propensity to do that. So any questions or comments on the hell realms, if I dare ask? No.
Well, while you were talking about this, I was remembering an experience where many people walked through burning embers. Did you ever do that?
Oh, right, the to walk on coals or whatever, yeah. I've never done that. I mean,
You understand the principle?
I think the principle behind it, maybe you can say more about it than what I know, is this idea of mind over matter kind of a thing, where you can, change your mind through various practices in preparation for this to not really be burned as you walk over these coals. Now, again, people are walking over them rather quickly. They don't stop and stand in the middle of the burning coals
They
and
don't
kind of,
walk through fast either.
no, but not,
They fall down.
yeah. But I don't know much more about it. Maybe somebody here does.
But I did it.
Did you do
My
it?
point.
Oh, wow, okay, good.
So while we were walking over the hub coals, we were to think of cool moss.
Right, that you
And
were.
we had, before we walked over the
Mhm.
fires, that we were basically hypnotized.
Interesting, yeah,
Yeah, and that we knew that this was coming up and we had to be very strict in obeying all the rules.
interesting.
Just not taking your mind off of coal moss, because as soon as you did, you would be burned.
Right,
But a woman watched me walk over it, and she said, you walked over some of the reddest coals,
interesting.
and
Nothing
I
burnt,
felt
yeah.
nothing.
Well, good, thank you for sharing that. I've never met anybody who's actually done that, so I appreciate that, Anne Marie. Again,
I'm thinking
Mhm.
that it's kind of like samsara,
Yeah,
letting go of the world and so you're kind of letting go of all your fears and thoughts about what a fire is.
interesting, yeah. Again, and I don't doubt the power of the mind to do these things at all, because Buddhism that's the main gist of it, is the power of our minds to even create worlds like this and to be free of worlds like this. I guess, again, I'm always just trying to make sure we direct our attention into making sure that we're doing everything we can to ever avoid these sorts of experiences. We might be able to work with our minds in this human life to do some pretty amazing things, but in other existences, that may very well be lacking. We may not have that power of mind in those existences that we can generate in this human life.
Well, I'm principally what I'm thinking about is that so much of our suffering in this life comes from our mind.
Mhm.
And this is all you're talking about all this stuff. And if you can let go of this mind, control,
Mhm.
that, you can reach, like you say, liberation or freedom. I mean, I think it's very intuitive Buddhist.
Yeah, I think so. Again, it's just in Buddhism, as we'll see, because that's coming up in the latter part of the text, is really how do you attain this nirvana,
Mhm.
and the detailed teachings about generating the wisdom of emptiness and so on that we've touched on here and there before. But I think Bobby had his hand up too. Thank you, Anne Marie.
I just got a quick question.
Sure.
Have you personally experienced any of the non-human hell realms, or maybe, perhaps one can in meditation have a vision or, insight into these realms?
Yeah, I mean, of course, not consciously have I experienced them, because they say that every one of us has been reborn in these states of existence countless times. So we have that in our kind of consciousness that goes back without any beginning. Those imprints are there from those experiences.
Right.
But to access them would take clairvoyance, which can be developed in deep meditation. And there actually is a clairvoyance where past lives. You can actually see them as clearly as you see what's in front of you right now through accessing deeper levels of your own awareness.
Wow.
Haven't attained that state myself, but and what was the second part of it then?
That's good.
That's
good.
good.
Thank you.
But I mean, I think that as you go through these, it's kind of interesting. They often talk, and Rinpoche even would talk about this, that there are two ways of approaching these sorts of topics. One is through the force of your imagination to think about being in such a state of existence, because that is to generate this wholesome fear for ourselves. But the second way that we should not neglect either is to think of the other beings who are in such hellish existences or horrible states and generate compassion for them, because we see again that we've been in that same situation. In this human life, we're not experiencing that level of pain and suffering that's unrelenting and so on. But we've been there. We're just like those beings. There's no difference in terms of we're under the control of our karma and afflictions, and we could be one breath away from joining them in that very same experience. So there can be two ways of using these meditations, depending upon, again, we talked about in the motivation tonight, the three levels of the path. The first part, the generating a motivation for a good rebirth, is where this topic is introduced, because we have to see that this could be reality for us. When we stop breathing and our consciousness exits from this existence, from this body, it could go on very well to this unfortunate existence. That's where we start by beginning to be aware of that potential. And we generate a wish to engage in virtue and take heartfelt refuge in the three jewels so that we can avoid that. The second level is kind of where we're talking mainly, but to see that all of samsara is faulty, all of it is defective. And so even getting a good rebirth is going to have its problems. We're not going to be without suffering. But then at the third level is where we start generating the compassion for others. We go outside of just self-compassion, and a wish for our own freedom from suffering. But we start generating the wish to be able to help all others to have that same experience. So thank you for bringing that up, and thank you, Anne Marie. Did you want to share anything more? I'm sorry if I didn't.
No, if you wanted to ask any questions.
Oh, okay. Maybe after. Yeah. Anyone else, anything from tonight? So I know that this is a hard thing to it's 2 weeks till we meet again. I'm not going to say spend the next 2 weeks meditating on the hells, but that can be a little severe. But you should try to at least spend some time looking at this and reading through some of these and just imagining what it would be like to be there and see what that conjures up. It should develop some level of fear, some level of trepidation, where we actually dread the idea of being born in such an existence. Because again, we've been there countless times, and we could end up there if we don't really tend well to this life. Avoid the non-virtues, practice the virtues. And of course, generate on top of that the renunciation that says, this is indicative of how crappy samsara is. I have to really see samsara for what it is. And we'll go into the remaining states of existence when we reconvene in 2 weeks and talk about the animals, the hungry ghosts, as well as the demigods and the gods, and really gain an appreciation for even these more idyllic places in samsara, experiences in samsara, are not what we should be desiring in the end. We want freedom from it. We want to attain nirvana, and moreover, we want to attain the non-abiding nirvana that is Buddhahood, where we're not just going to check out of samsara ourselves and leave everyone behind, but rather become a Buddha so we can be tending to all of these beings and helping them on their path. Okay, I hope everyone hung in there with whatever technical difficulties we had tonight. Before we do the prayers, we do have the dedication list. If you have beings to add, I know Amata had some that she wanted to add to the list. Make sure that we put those beings on there. Are you finished? Did you want to read it? Okay, Sarah's going to read it.
Are there new names we put on?
There's for sickness is Duchen, and it was Rinchen. Can't remember the name of the other one. Amata, I'm sorry, that you wrote to me earlier. Rinchen, I want to say Rinchen Dorje, but I don't think that was it. Rinchen Norbo.
That's for illness?
Yes. And we still have the other animals. Joni is still on the list, I think. Joni the sheep. Karma the sheep. Okay. We're on the screen here, Sarah. Those are all for sickness. Oh,
So
okay.
the sheep, the two sheep, one is.
Norbu, Joni,
Is that for sickness?
Yeah, I think we have Joni on the list already, but we have to add Karma, Norbu, and Duchen.
Okay,
Bella for death,
Stella?
Bella.
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 Okay.
I've got one sheep is Norville and the other one is
Is Duchen,
Duchen.
Duchen, and then a third one is Karma.
Okay.
And we've got Joni. Okay. All right, Sarah's going to read the list.
And the sheep are for obstacles or
Or
illness?
illness.
Okay. Still writing.
Mhm.
Okay, for illness. I'm sorry. There are many things. For obstacle, Jane, Adrian, Jenny, Joseph, Hira, Bobby, Yolanda, Alejandro. Looks like Dorcas, Jane, Patty Bill, John, Jim, Carola, John A. Rinchin Norbu, and the sheep, Norbu, sorry,
Sorry, folks, we lost the names were recited, the rest of them on the list. Did you have any more, Sarah?
that's it.
That's it. Okay, so again, for those beings and for any other beings who we didn't mention, who we've offered to pray for, or who have asked us to pray for them, we include them in our dedications. So let's go ahead and do the prayers. I hope that my connection is in there for the last few minutes here. All right. Okay. Let me get to the right prayer now. Move those folks. Okay.
Due to the
Merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state.
May the supreme rule of
Chitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more.
long life for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The
Wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And we'll go to Osohita's long life prayer. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far off places, especially the West. Mindful of your loving concern for us, in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. And then for Rinpoche's swift return. Fearless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Thank you all again for your patience tonight in working with our technical difficulties. Again, next Thursday, I won't be teaching, but there's a wonderful teaching with Venerable Rubina lined up for 6 to 7:30, same time.
Same time.
And she'll be from Santa Fe, so until that day, and it just was a little too complicated to come up to Taos that day. So I'll be doing that online, and then there's 2 more in-person teachings in May. We do have Sakadawa in there on May 23rd. I might mention that we're going to do about a half hour of prayers before the teaching at 5:30 on that day. That's May 23rd. There'll be more coming out about that in the announcements that you receive by email. And then the final teaching with me will be on 30th, and then Geshe Shara will resume in June at some point yet to be announced. So, all right, just giving you a little preview. Anything else from folks here? No. Okay, thank you all online. Thank you all, everyone.
Thank you,
here.
Donla.
Thank
you. Yalla.
Remember, there are no pizzas in the hell room. Okay, everyone, be well.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.